The wind howled low across the plains, dragging dust like a funeral shroud over the road that stretched toward the tired silhouette of Boon Ranch. Fence posts leaned like old men, and the roof of the barn sagged under the weight of years and neglect. Buzzards circled lazily in the distance, floating above a world too dry to bury its dead. She came walking through that dust with 4 children in tow, barefoot, their clothes threadbare, their faces smeared with grime and sunburn. Clara May Sullivan didn't look like much. Skin like parchment, dark hair tied back with a piece of frayed ribbon, eyes dulled by too many long nights and empty cupboards. But she walked tall, her shoulders square against the weight of the desert wind. Elias Boon saw her before she reached the fence line. He was sitting on his porch with a cup of boiled coffee, watching the world like he always did, quietly, suspiciously. The limp in his leg kept him from writing these days, but he still carried the same 6-shooter on his hip. Folks said he'd once gunned down a whole gang by himself during a cattle raid. That was years ago. Now, the only battles he fought were against drought and the ghosts of memory. She paused at the gate and lifted her chin. "Mr. Boon," he grunted, not rising from his seat. "You're either lost or desperate, ma'am. Which is it?" She looked back at the children. The smallest, no more than 3, clung to her leg and whimpered. "Desperate," she said. "I heard you needed someone to clean the barn." Elias narrowed his eyes. "You heard wrong. I tolerate someone cleaning the barn when it gets too bad to breathe in there. What are you wanting for it?" "Work. That's all. Just a chance." Her voice cracked in her throat. "I don't want charity." He rubbed his jaw. The woman looked worn out, but not broken. Not yet. He'd seen plenty just like her. Hope dragging behind them like a busted wagon wheel. "Where's your man?" She hesitated. "Dead. Took a bullet when some outlaws came through Shelby Creek. They burned what was left." Boone looked away, spitting into the dirt. Shelby Creek. That was what, springtime? She nodded. He stared at the empty barn across the yard. "Ain't had a hand in months," he muttered, more to himself than her. "Fine. You clean the barn. Feed gets hauled. Tack gets brushed. You finish what I give you. I'll give you coin and maybe a meal." Clara nodded once. "Thank you." He leaned forward. "But this ain't no place for children. Not out here." "I don't have anywhere else to put them," she said, her jaw set. Boone stared a long while. "They can sit under the tree by the water trough. Shade's decent." She gave a nod, then turned to usher the kids over to the cottonwood tree that clawed its way out of the packed earth, like it resented still being alive. The kids collapsed into the shade, wide-eyed and quiet, as Clara rolled up her sleeves and walked into the barn without another word. For the next hour, Boone didn't speak, just sat and watched from the porch as the dust swirled, as Clara worked like a woman possessed. He saw her lifting broken tack, dragging out moldy hay, brushing off cobwebs that hung like ghosts from the rafters. The sweat soaked her blouse, but she didn't stop. Even when the wind kicked up or the sun burned hotter, she kept on. Boone chewed the inside of his cheek. He couldn't remember the last time he saw someone work like that. Not a man, not a hired hand, and sure as hell not a woman with 4 starving kids in the shade. Around mid-afternoon, he called over. "There's a pump behind the shed. It's old, but the water's good enough." Clara didn't answer. She just nodded once, wiped her face with the back of her arm, and kept on sweeping out the dust. The children were asleep now, curled up in the dirt beneath the tree like a litter of pups. Boone kept watching. Something didn't sit right in his gut. The way she moved, the stubborn set of her jaw. He'd known pride before, but this was different. This was survival dressed in rags. The sun dipped lower, stretching shadows like claws over the land. Clara dragged a bucket of old oats outside, dumped it, and leaned on the shovel. Her breath came short and fast. Boone saw her shoulders slump, saw her sway. Then she dropped. No scream, no cry, just crumpled right there in the dirt beside the barn, like a sack of bones and fire burned out. Boone stood fast, the limp in his leg making his path crooked as he hobbled down the steps. The shovel still rocked slightly where she'd let fall. He knelt beside her. Her skin was hot and pale, her chest heaving, lips cracked. Starved, overworked, sunstruck. Boon looked toward the kids, still asleep in the shade. He whispered, mostly to himself, "Damn it, Clara May, what kind of world lets this happen?" Then, without another word, he lifted her in his arms and carried her toward the house. She came to with the scent of cornbread and bacon in the air. Her lips were dry, and her head pounded like a blacksmith's hammer. Clara tried to sit up, but the room spun. Sunlight filtered through a lace curtain, too fine for the kind of places she was used to sleeping. She was in a real bed, clean sheets, warm but soft. Someone had taken her boots off. Her arms ached, her body weak. Then she heard the clang of pans in the next room. Clara flinched, instinctively checking for her children. Before she could call out, a voice came through the cracked door, gruff, quiet. "They're fine. Still out under the tree. I gave him bread and some of my last molasses." Boy near licked the tin. Elias Boon stepped into the room, holding a tin cup and a bowl. "You passed out. Didn't make it much farther than the barn wall. Here, water first." Clara took the cup with shaking hands. Her voice rasped. "Why'd you bring me in?" He shrugged, setting the bowl on the nightstand. "Ain't me to let someone die for trying too hard. You shouldn't be. Don't argue with the man that fed you." She fell quiet, sipping the water slowly. Her pride wanted to spit it back at him, but her body knew better. She finished the cup, then let it rest in her lap. Boon crossed his arms and leaned against the doorframe. "You and the kids can stay the night. Bunkhouse needs cleaning, but it's got a stove and cots." She tensed. "I didn't ask for shelter." "I didn't say you did. But a woman can't work herself into the grave and still feed 4 mouths. You'll kill yourself and leave them orphans." Clara stared at him. "You think I'm not trying to keep them alive? I think you're wearing yourself down to bone and grit to do it." He stepped forward, laying a rolled-up blanket on the edge of the bed. "You've earned a rest. Just one night." She looked away. "I'll work off the food. And the water." Boon nodded. "You already have." He left the room, leaving her with silence and the smell of cooked bacon. Her fingers curled around the edge of the blanket. She hated needing anyone, but she hated the hollow eyes of her children more. By sundown, Clara was up and moving, slow but steady. She called her kids in and fed them at the kitchen table, real food, not crusts and roots dug from dry soil. Boon didn't sit with them. He stayed on the porch, rolling a cigarette with hands that knew too much time and too many guns. The children laughed for the first time in weeks, even the baby, little Martha, who giggled when Elias offered her a piece of jerky, like it was candy. Clara watched from the doorway, arms folded tight across her chest. She didn't trust him. Men were kind when they wanted something. That's how her husband had been before the drink and the fists. Elias was quiet. That was worse. The quiet ones kept their violence tucked away until it exploded. But the kids, they weren't afraid of him. Her eldest, Caleb, even helped him carry kindling to the bunkhouse later that night. Boon didn't smile, but there was a softness in his eyes that caught Clara off guard. Later, after the children had fallen asleep in their own beds for the first time in months, Boon sat on the porch with a lantern beside him. Clara came out quietly. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He didn't look at her. "Because someone once did it for me. A long time ago." She waited. He took a drag from his cigarette. "Used to have a ranch further south. Wife. Son. Big plans. Then a cattle gang rode through. Claimed the range belonged to them now. Wouldn't take no. When I pushed back, they came at night." Clara felt the chill of memory pass between them like a cold wind. "They burned it all. Shot my boy while he tried to run for help. My wife. I buried her in the orchard." Boon's voice cracked barely. "After that, I didn't talk much. Just rode after the men who did it, one by one." "You killed them?" she asked. "Every last one." He tossed the cigarette into the dirt and ground it with his boot. "Didn't bring him back, though. Just left me older. Meaner." She didn't speak, but she understood. Some grief rotted a man from the inside out. Boon stood. "You stay as long as you need. I won't ask questions. Won't ask anything, except that you don't lie to me." Clara nodded slowly. "I won't." The next few days passed in wary peace. Clara took to the chores like she was born to them. mending tack, patching the chicken coop, even repairing old clothes with thread she found in Boon's sewing kit. The kids thrived. The bunkhouse glowed at night with candlelight and laughter. Elias, for his part, kept fixing things. Repaired the pump, cleaned out the root cellar, brought Clara a box of books from the attic for the children. She didn't say thank you. He didn't expect her to. But the peace didn't last. Rumors drifted in from town, carried by a one-eyed ranch hand who still played poker in Dust Rock every Friday. He told Elias over a bottle of rye. Some folks say that widow you tooken's got trouble on her tail. Others say she's lying, that maybe she had a hand in her man's death. Elias stared at him flatly. And you believe any of that? The man shrugged. I believe outlaws are riding the ridge again. Carver gang's been seen. They hit 3 farms west of here. Killed a marshal in cold blood 2 weeks ago. Boone's eyes narrowed. They come this way? Could be they're looking for someone. The ranch hand tapped the table. Could be they already know where she is. Elias didn't say another word, but that night, he checked a rifle he hadn't touched in years and placed it beside his door. And when Clara came to bring him supper, she saw it. He didn't explain. He didn't have to. The quiet before the storm had settled across the desert. And Elias Boon, once feared across 3 counties, wasn't about to let his past, or hers, be buried without a fight. The dust kicked up like smoke from hooves hellbent on war. When the Carver gang rode into Dust Rock, it wasn't with stealth or subtlety. They wanted to be seen, wanted folks to feel the weight of their coming like thunder rolling across the prairie. Men with long coats and lawless eyes spilled from their saddles in front of the saloon. Guns swayed at their hips, not in holsters but in fists, barrels catching the hot sun. They laughed too loud, drank too fast, and made sure every door in town slammed shut behind trembling hands. Women pulled children from the street. Shopkeepers lowered their shades and bolted locks that wouldn't hold a sneeze. Sheriff Hobbs stepped out with a badge pinned to a vest too big for his bony frame. He held up a hand and barely got a word out before Luther Carver drew his revolver and shot the tin stark clean off his chest. Didn't say I was here for a conversation, Carver said, chewing the stub of a cigar. We're passing through. Ain't that right, boys? The rest of the gang hooted, spreading out like oil over water. Dust Rock, already clinging to life by splinters and stubbornness, went dead quiet. Elias Boon heard about it the next morning from a peddler who came up the road pale as milk. The man spoke fast, his hands shaking on the reins. They're headed east, he said. Someone said they was asking about a woman. Widow with young uns. Said one of their own was killed in Shelby Creek, and they're looking to balance the scales. Elias felt the cold set in behind his ribs. The peddler didn't stay, just handed over a sack of flour and rode off like the devil was on his heels. Later, behind the barn, Elias spoke low to Hank Wilkes, an old ranch hand with a busted arm and a mouth full of stories. We can move her and the kids to the old Prosser cabin. It's a mile up the ridge, hidden in the trees. Hank frowned. You think she'll go? Elias shook his head. She's proud, and tired of running. Unbeknownst to either of them, Clara stood just beyond the corner, a rope in hand and a pail of water forgotten at her feet. She'd heard every word. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara stepped into the barn. Elias was brushing his gelding, back turned. You don't get to decide I'm leaving. He paused, but didn't look at her. It ain't about pride. It's about safety, she said. And you think I'm too weak to help. He turned then, face hard as leather. I think you've done enough to deserve peace. Not another war. Clara stepped forward, her voice low but firm. I won't be peace to anyone if I'm running again. I know how to fight. Elias squinted at her. Do you? She met his gaze without flinching. My father was a Union scout. He taught me to shoot before I was tall enough to carry the rifle. Taught me to track, too. I didn't survive Shelby Creek by accident. A long silence passed between them. Then Elias walked over to the gun rack on the far wall and handed her a Winchester, old but well kept. Then we started dawn. And so they did. In the mornings, after chores were done and the children were fed, Elias took her out past the northern fence, where mesquite trees gave patchy shade and crows perched like sentries. He taught her his way, measured breaths, slow squeezes, counting wind. But Clara didn't need much teaching. Her aim was sharp, her stance steady. The rifle was just an extension of her will. They practiced every day. When she wasn't shooting, she was teaching Caleb how to dig traps. Elias showed her how to reinforce the doors, where the best cover on the ranch lay. Together, they built a defense not just of wood and bullet, but of trust. A quiet rhythm settled between them, forged not from romance, but from mutual respect and something deeper, something unspoken. Elias found himself watching her when she wasn't looking. The way she moved, the calm in her voice even when she was angry, the fierce tenderness with which she held Martha close at night. She wasn't like the women he used to know. She was something else entirely, a fire that burned clean through the dark. But still he worried. The thought of her facing down men, like Luther Carver, made his stomach knot. He'd seen what that gang could do, seen what they'd done to his family. Clara noticed the change in him, the quiet stretches of silence, the way he polished his revolver longer than necessary, the long looks at the horizon. "You're afraid," she said one evening, while folding a blanket on the porch. He didn't deny it. "I've buried too many." "Then stop planning my grave," she said. He chuckled softly, despite himself. "You always this stubborn." "Only when I know I'm right." Then the world changed with the cry of a hawk and a shimmer in the heat haze beyond the southern ridge. Caleb came running, breath ragged, eyes wide. "There's a man, up on the rocks, watching us." Elias dropped his mug and stepped outside. He raised his spyglass and scanned the ridge. A shape stood tall and still against the sky, half shrouded by brush. Long coat, rifle slung across the back, a black hat, a scout. Elias lowered the glass and felt the weight of the coming storm settle on his shoulders. "They found us," he said. "It's begun." The dawn came blood-red over the desert, not the soft kind that kisses the land awake, but the cruel kind, the kind that burns and blinds. The wind was quiet, as if the earth itself held its breath. Elias Boon was already at the gate, rifle slung over one shoulder, revolver strapped tight to his side. He'd been awake all night, watching the ridgeline, listening to the faint, distant sounds of hoofbeats echoing like a coming storm. The old man's body ached with years, but his hands didn't shake. Not yet. Clara stood on the barn roof, rifle resting steady on a mound of hay she'd packed as cover. Her long hair was tied back with an old bandana, and her eyes were narrowed, calm and unblinking. She'd kissed each of her children on the forehead before sending them to the root cellar, whispered promises and prayers she wasn't sure she believed. Caleb had tried to stay and fight. She made him promise to protect the others instead. The first shot cracked the silence like lightning. A bullet slammed into the gate, splintering wood. Elias didn't flinch. He squinted toward the tree lane and counted 7 riders, fanning out along the ridge, guns already drawn. Dust bloomed behind their horses as they charged. Elias fired first. One man tumbled from his saddle, dead before he hit the dirt. The rest came harder, howling curses as they approached. Clara's first shot hit a man in the shoulder, spinning him off his horse and into the dust. Her second cracked through another's skull cleanly, dropping him in his tracks. The Carver gang returned fire in a storm of gunpowder and fury. Bullets ripped through fence posts and kicked up the dirt around the house. Elias ducked behind the gate's barricade, firing carefully, deliberately, but the years caught up with him fast. He moved to cover Hank, who had come up behind him with an old double barrel, and didn't see the third rider circle from the side. The outlaw fired, and Elias turned just in time to shove Caleb, who had disobeyed and climbed out of the cellar, out of the way. The bullet caught Elias in the side. He went down hard. Clara saw it from the roof, saw Caleb screaming and dragging the old man toward cover, saw the blood soaking Elias' shirt. Her heart surged to her throat, and for a second, the world went silent. Then her jaw clenched. Her fingers tightened around the rifle stock. She took a breath. Then she began to shoot. Not wild, not frantic, precise. Cold. Clean. Each shot found a mark. A man falling backward over his horse, another tumbling into the fence. She moved like a ghost, adjusting her position between the rafters, using shadow and silence like weapons. Down below, the Carver gang hesitated. They hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected death to come from a woman's hands. Luther Carver himself dismounted, stepping forward with a sneer that curled like smoke. "Show yourself, widow," he bellowed. "You think you're safe up there? You think you've won? You just made it personal." Clara shifted again, rifle aimed, breath held. But she didn't fire. Not yet. Carver moved closer, dragging a torch from his saddlebag. "You can't hide behind a barn forever. I'll burn it down with your brats inside." That did it. Clara stood, fully visible now on the roof, her silhouette stark against the morning light. "Take one more step, and I'll put you in the dirt." Carver laughed. "Is that so? What are you going to do? Sweetheart, sow me a warning." Clara took aim. "I'm Clara May Sullivan, daughter of Sergeant James Fletcher, 3rd Illinois Scouts. He taught me to shoot when I was 8. I killed my first man when I was 13. Confederate raider tried to take my sister. I don't miss." Carver's smirk faltered. She fired. The bullet caught his thigh, sending him sprawling into the dirt. He roared, clutching his leg, and the rest of the gang panicked. Some fired wildly toward the barn. Others turned tail and ran. The few who stayed were cut down by Hank and a newly armed Caleb, who fired from behind the wagon, grim and unflinching. Then, a sound rose from the south, shouts and hoofbeats. Townsfolk, armed men and women from Dust Rock, finally stirred by the smoke and the sound of battle. They came with rifles, pitchforks, shotguns. Came because word had spread, because Clara's stand had become more than survival. It had become justice. The remaining outlaws fled. Carver, bleeding and crawling for his revolver, looked up just in time to see Clara descend from the roof, rifle still trained on him. "You killed my husband," she said. "He never had a gun in his hand, just a spade." Carver coughed blood, eyes wide. "He got in our way." "So did you." She raised the rifle again, but her hand paused. She didn't pull the trigger. Instead, she kicked the gun from his hand and turned as the townsfolk closed in. Let the law, or what was left of it, deal with him. When it was over, Clara rushed to Elias, kneeling beside where he lay under a blood-soaked blanket. His breath was ragged, shallow, his eyes clouded with pain. "I'm still here," she said softly. "You're not dying, you stubborn bastard." He coughed a laugh, blood on his lips. "Didn't think I'd go out in bed, did you?" "You're not going anywhere," she said, pressing cloth to his wound. "Not yet." Elias tried to speak again, but his eyes rolled back, and he slipped into unconsciousness. Clara didn't panic. She didn't cry. She just kept pressure on the wound, yelling for someone to fetch the doctor. And all the while, her rifle lay beside her, still warm from justice. The desert had begun to soften, not by much, but enough that the wind didn't bite so hard come morning, and wildflowers bloomed in little bursts of color where the dirt used to crack wide open. Weeks had passed since the shootout at Boone Ranch, and though scars still marked the fence posts and barn walls, life had stitched itself back together with quiet resolve. Elias Boon healed slow, but steady. The bullet had missed anything vital, though the doctor warned him he'd never move as fast again. Elias didn't care much about that. He spent most of his days on the porch now, leg propped up, watching the horizon with a calm he hadn't felt in years. Every so often, he'd glance toward the corral, where the children played, or the field where Clara worked, and his face would ease like a man who'd stopped waiting for the worst. Clara ran the ranch now. She hadn't asked. Elias hadn't told her to. It had just happened. Fences got mended. The tack room got organized. A new hen house went up behind the barn. Caleb learned to saddle a horse without help, and Ruth, just 6, watered the goats every morning like it was a sacred duty. Martha toddled around the porch under Clara's watchful eye while the baby, still unnamed, still wide-eyed and solemn, grew plump on goat's milk and sunlight. The townsfolk came by more often than before, bringing eggs or flour or just conversation. Nobody said it outright, but the way they looked at Clara told the whole story. Some with awe, some with guilt, all with respect. She never bragged, never told the tale herself. But word had spread anyway, of the widow who stood her ground, of the outlaw gang brought low not by marshals, but by a woman with a rifle and nothing left to lose. Dust Rock changed her name in whispers. Legend. Elias hated fuss, but even he couldn't hide the smile when the mayor himself rode out and offered Clara an old deed to the northern acreage, and used land that had once belonged to some banker who never returned. "It's yours," he said. "Consider it thanks." Clara took it with a nod, tucked it in the back of her Bible, and went back to feeding the chickens. One evening, as the sun dipped low and set the sky aflame, Elias motioned her to sit beside him on the porch. She came, wiping her hands on her apron. "You've rebuilt this place," he said. "We've rebuilt it," she replied, her voice even. He studied her face, the way the light hit her cheekbones, the faint streaks of gray in her braid. "You ever think about leaving still?" She shook her head. "Nowhere left to run." He nodded slowly, then took a breath. "I don't want you here as a worker anymore." She frowned slightly. "Then what do you want me here as?" He looked at her, and something passed between them, quiet, steady, deep. "As a partner. You've done more for this place than any man ever did. More than I did, truth be told." Clara's eyes searched his for a long moment. "You sure?" she asked, her voice barely above the hum of the wind. "That's a lot of years and scars to share." "I've got more room for both than I used to," he said, "and less time to waste." She didn't answer, not with words, just placed her hand gently on his weathered one and gave it a firm squeeze. The next morning, she broke ground in the clearing where the gunfight had ended. The soil there was hard, stubborn, but she was used to that. She dug deep, planted tomatoes, corn, and lavender. Something useful, something beautiful, a reminder that even blood-soaked ground could grow again if given time and care. The children helped. Caleb held the stakes. Ruth chased off crows. Clara worked quietly, not talking much, but every move spoke of purpose. Where others saw a battlefield, she saw a beginning. By sundown, the garden was in, and when the wind came again, it didn't sound like warning. It sounded like song. Years later, folks would still talk about Boon Ranch. They'd tell the story of the widow who arrived with nothing but children and courage, of the old gunslinger who gave her shelter, and the gang that learned too late what kind of storm a mother could be. They'd pass the ranch, see the garden in full bloom, the house painted fresh, the laughter echoing through the hills, and they'd tip their hats, even if no one stood outside to see it. And somewhere on the edge of that land, a porch light would flicker on each night, steady and warm, because some heroes don't ride in with guns blazing. Some walk in barefoot, carrying their children, and never walk out again.